Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Vikings. This team finished 13-4. Alright, they had a top 10 offense in the league. Unfortunately, they had one of the worst defenses in the National Football League, and their playoff hopes, they did not necessarily go as planned with an early loss to the New York Giants at home, 24-31. Now, personally, and keep in mind, this is coming from a cheesehead here, I still like the trajectory of the Minnesota Vikings. I like what they're doing from a management standpoint. I like what they're doing from a coaching standpoint, and I think that they still have plenty of personnel. Now, I found that really interesting that in a tweet from AJK fan, this was it. Heading into the 2023 offseason, how do you feel about the current state of the Minnesota Vikings? It was thrilled with 13-4, positive momentum, indifferent, and worried for the future. Now, I think it's positive momentum, and that actually ended up winning it with 43%, coming in at number 2, worried for the future at 33%, and indifferent at 17%. So 50% of Vikings fans out there are, either a little bit indifferent, not sure what to think, or a little bit worried for the future. And I can understand it. I really can, because it's not the way you want to end a season. But at the end of the day, I think that they built a bunch of momentum heading into this offseason, and I still like the players that they have. I think really what it comes down to was this past year in the draft, a lot of players got injured. And specifically on the defensive side, they dealt with so many young injuries that they either just weren't able to play majority of the season, or they weren't able to gain any momentum and just adjust to the NFL speed. So, you got to think long term here. And with one more year, possibly of Kirk Cousins, we'll talk about all of that. I still think Minnesota they're still a playoff team, no doubt about it. So before we get into it, if you guys enjoy, be sure to hit that like button, hit that sub button. If you guys do enjoy it and you like daily NFL content, I do post a bunch of Vikings videos, and this is just going to be the start of the offseason. We're going to do kind of a broad offseason outlook in today's video as the NFL season kind of comes to a close here. Now, me personally, they're going to have some decisions to make as far as salary goes. All right, and we'll talk about all that, but it's going to start with the draft. Okay, the Vikings have a round 1 pick 23. They have a round 3 pick 87, round 4 pick 116, and a round 5 pick 155 at the time of this recording. That is not great. Just 4 draft picks. It's not ideal, right? You gave up a couple to acquire TJ Hawkinson, but here's the thing. They're going to have to get crafty, and they're going to have to get creative as far as the salary cap goes. There's a couple of big-time decisions that this squad needs to make, mainly with you have positions like on defense, like the cornerback spot. You have the edge rusher. You have the linebacker position. And a lot of Vikings fans, from what I've been able to gather, are kind of almost like, actually what a lot of Vikings fans wanted last year was almost like a retool, a retweak, not a complete rebuild, but just a 1 year, just like modification year where you still are competitive, but you're also opening the door for a lot of young talent to step in, and who knows what could happen. Like take a team who's in the Super Bowl right now, like the Kansas City Chiefs. They drafted so much on the defensive side. They had major defensive issues for the last several seasons. It's still not perfect. They're kind of middle of the pack as far as defensive rating goes, but they drafted so many young cats, and so many of them are stepping up, and it's a big reason why they're in the Super Bowl right now. Obviously, you do have Patrick Mahomes, and that makes it a lot easier, but I do want this team to focus primarily on the defensive side with that pick number 23. I've seen a couple of mock drafts that I like. For example, Cam Smith out of South Carolina. There should be a lot of cornerbacks who either are going to be available at 23 or are going to fall to 23, right? Now, obviously, the draft picks for Minnesota, it's not set in stone, but let's talk about the big-time question here, Kirk Cousins. Now, I've seen some rumors, and I do like the progression Kirk made. He's going to be 35 this August, so that is kind of a red flag there. you have Nick Mullins entering free agency. So regardless, they're going to need to find a backup quarterback, and I think they should focus on finding a quarterback of the future. But when you have this little draft compensation, or this little draft picks, it makes it a lot more difficult. So you have to be very deliberate with all of your draft picks, as you should. But Kirk Cousins, 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, about 4,600 total yards, completion percentage of 65.9. It's averaging around 270 yards per game. Now that 14 interception number is ideally not what you want, but there were some issues on the offensive line. The run game kind of stalled out. Dalvin Cook is one of those players where I actually anticipate the Vikings to move on from Dalvin. Now, statistically speaking, he had a pretty solid year if you're just taking it at face value. About 1,200 rushing yards. That's 4.4 yards per carry. He did have 8 touchdowns, but you still have him under contract for like 3 more seasons. And it's not like the Vikings are going to want to be able, it's not like they want to get rid of guys maybe like Dalvin Cook or Adam Thielen or Harrison Smith. But if you want to be able to, because you can't just completely rebuild through the draft with just 4 picks, you're going to need to be able to enter free agency and acquire some players. They have some guys that they're looking to re-sign as well, but I anticipate heavy draft resources and heavy free agency resources being put in this offseason so you don't stall out and you don't get worse. You definitely don't want a regression year, but you also want to continue to prep and build for future years. So it's a very difficult decision that this Vikings management is going to have. But when you have cats like Justin Jefferson, who is one of the most polarizing playmaking players in the entire National Football League, you want to keep him. And you want to do everything in your power to keep him because, he's one of a kind. He's truly one of a kind. So I don't think that Kirk Cousins entering the last year of his contract is going to be traded away. It's going to be difficult to trade him away. You can't cut him. So I think this is probably his last year in Minnesota, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Now the question becomes, maybe not round 1, maybe not round 3, but round 4, round 5, do you draft a quarterback like, for example, Brock Purdy, who unfortunately got injured this past week in the NFC Championship? He was the last pick of the draft. So I'm eyeing that round 5 pick, 155, where they might draft a quarterback of the future to just kind of get a year under his belt behind Kirk Cousins, and they'll deal with what happens afterwards. And, you should be able to acquire some type of financially feasible backup quarterback for Captain Kirk. Now, I've seen, some articles like on Vikings Wire where they have, rumors rumbling about Trey Lance. That is a possibility. I actually don't hate the idea of Trey Lance going to Minnesota, some type of trade package where Kirk Cousins lands himself in San Francisco. Zach Wilson, I hate that a lot. BYU's Jaron Hall, Anthony Richardson out of Florida, those two aren't necessarily the worst, but I do think that the Vikings have bigger issues to solve, and it mainly is on the defensive side. And I really am looking at positions like cornerback. You definitely want Duke Shelley back. The edge rush linebacker position, we'll see what they decide to do. You could also save some money as far as cutting some cats go, like Hendricks. But I think free agency, they're going to make some decisions. I think free agency is where you see an increase in the linebacker position. It's going to be it's a tricky offseason for Minnesota because I understand the reason for concern, but at the same time you do have a bunch of talent. Like, I don't think it's a fluke for any team ever to go 13-4. I get it. They won a bunch of come from behind wins. They won a bunch of fourth quarter victories. They had a bunch of one-score games. I understand all those statistics, but this Minnesota team really isn't that bad. And as far as preseason expectations go, I don't think too many people were selecting Minnesota to go 13-4. I think people were definitely saying this is going to be an above 500 team and that they're going to make the playoffs and possibly make some noise in the playoffs. But I don't think too many people before the season were predicting a 13-4 year. So I think if you take it with that, I really don't. I'm not worried. I'm not indifferent. I think they do have a lot of positive momentum. Teams are going to lose players, regardless of if they just won the Super Bowl. If you have the number 1 pick, you're going to lose some players. You're going to have to make some tough decisions, and you're going to have to make some nice draft picks. Right? That's what it comes down to. So I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota focused in round 3, in round 4, in round 5 of acquiring, getting rid of Dalvin Cook, getting rid of Adam Thielen, and drafting a running back, because there are, you don't need to draft a running back in round 1. They're, as a lot of people like to say, expendable. They get injured a lot. So I personally, my personal opinion, I don't know if Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook will be back in Vikings uniforms next year. I would not be surprised if they cut both of them to save a bunch of money and used the draft and got like just a more reliable, sturdy, nothing crazy running back in free agency, along with, I like KJ Osborne, I definitely do, and I'm glad that they got TJ Hawkinson, but I also think there needs to be a more reliable, more explosive threat, just actually at most positions on this team, like linebacker, but wide receiver. So it's a tricky offseason, and it's kind of hard to focus and just dive right into their whole offseason. Like that's actually kind of more of a podcast thing. So we're gonna take this, video by video, focused on a plethora of different topics. So be sure to hit that like button, hit that sub button. If you want more Vikings content, comment also helps for the algorithm. But show some love down below. But most importantly, guys, I want to hear, what do you think the Vikings should focus on this year in the offseason?